evening, everyone. We're just going to give everybody, 30 seconds, 60 seconds to join before we begin this evening's webinar. So thank you for joining us tonight, wherever you are in the world. If you're in the daytime in America, or you're in the evening time in England and our four nations, and you're in the cold and the dark, thank you for joining us. We very much appreciate it. Um, so welcome. Welcome to tonight's webinar. We are absolutely privileged and honoured to have Barb Clark join us this evening. Barb, as many of you will know, is an internationally recognised trainer, speaker, advocate whose work combines what I would say is honesty, humour, massive humour, and heartfelt wisdom to empower caregivers and professionals alike. Personally, for me, Barb was someone I trained with, and I really credit her and the program that I did with me being here today. In fact, I think we have more trainers that I trained with here this evening as well. So hello to Christine if she's here. Barb, I think, is down to earth and funny and honest and tackles some of the toughest parenting challenges, sort of raging and lying and stealing and beyond, with real compassion and clarity, and offers real world strategies and truly makes a difference. And Barb's been with us before, but with her book, Raising Kids and Teens with FASD, Gemma will put a link in the chat for you guys. If you want to order it, you should order it. It's brilliant. Barb is an adoptive parent of five young adult children, including one with FASD. And Barb brings lived experience to her work with her organisation, FASD Mosaic. And she was diagnosed herself at the age of 56. So she brings like really rare authenticity and powerful insight into what it means to live and parent within neurodiversity. So I think tonight promises to be really inspirational. We've had a huge amount of people register, a massive amount of questions that I've had to trawl through and try and condense for our hour. So I'm not going to keep going and going and going, but I'm just going to say welcome, Barb, before I move on to questions. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be back with y'all today.
Thank you so much. So we had so many questions on so many topics. So many were submitted, and Gemma, myself, and our team went through all of them to try and ensure that we covered as much as we could to make tonight valuable for everybody. There were, I have to say, a lot of questions on diagnosis, and tonight is not a diagnosis webinar. It is really about raising kids, raising teens, and advice and strategies. So we are going to touch on it, but really briefly. So I'm just going to ask Barb one question. Why is diagnosis important, and how do you support a child if a diagnosis isn't obtainable?
Yeah. Those are diagnostics are so stinking complicated for this disability. I mean, it is for many, but I think this is one of the hard ones. The diagnosis is important. I think about this whenever somebody has a bump or a lump or something that's not feeling right, you want to know what it is, right? And you're going to the doctors and they're trying to figure it out, and you just want to know what it is. And sometimes you're misdiagnosed, right? So actually, yeah, I have a weird thing right now that I'm dealing with. I've got kidney problems right now. That's why I'm all red in the face and having all these weird issues. And I sent a photo of my fingernails. I've got these weird fingernails now that are a sign of kidney disease. And I sent a photo of it to my doctor, and they were like, well, you should not use nail polish for the next 8 weeks. And I was like, I never use nail polish. That's not the problem. Like, but so, and they were thinking it was a nail polish issue. I'm like, no, I'm trying to tell you this. It's called Lindsay's nails is what they're called. I'm like, how do you guys not know? Anyways, we want to know what it is. And when you're misdiagnosed with something else, like these people are assuming my problem with my nails is my fingernail polish that I don't use, right? That's frustrating because it doesn't answer the questions and what the problem is. And so So that's a part of, a big part of why there's a lot of peace that comes with understanding and knowing why we are struggling in certain areas and making sense of it. But there are so many times when we can't get the diagnosis because it's so complicated to get that confirmation of prenatal alcohol exposure. And so currently, for most of the diagnoses under the spectrum, you have to have that confirmation, and it's complicated to get. And so when you can't get it, I recommend, usually they're diagnosed with something else, whether it's ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder, or, the list of trash can diagnoses goes on and on and on. And usually they'll qualify for some supports from that. But what I usually say is if this is what you think and you're a family, a caregiver, then learn about FASD, use the strategies that we know work better with FASD, and try to share that with a team of people, whether it's school or the therapeutic interventions. It's not going to be in their individualized learning plans or whatever it's called in the country that you're in, but you can tell the team, this is what we think it is, but we can't get the diagnosis because of ABC. So please learn about this and use strategies for this diagnosis.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. So, that said, we've addressed the diagnostic questions, of which there were many. So I'm going to move on to what is your real area of talking in everything that we do. So behavior,
Hmm.
lying, stealing, anger, aggression, impulse control, which I know you know so much about. So we had so many questions. So I'm just going to shoot through what I've tried to put together. So how
Yep.
do we manage lying? So in the UK we say fibs, you're fibbing.
Yep.
So how do
Yes.
we manage lying, fibs,
That's
confabulation and stealing, especially when the young person is really proud of it and doesn't understand that it's wrong?
Yeah. Well, the majority of the time when our kids with FASD are fibbing or lying, it usually isn't true fibbing and true lying. It's the confabulation term. And even those times when it's not, because it is typical for children and adolescents to lie, right? There is some that there's some normalcy to that. And so sometimes they're going to do some of that typical fibbing. Um, but most of the time it's confabulation where their brains are filling in the gaps of their memory with wrong information. And so what I was just actually coaching a mom this morning from California here in the US about this, and because she was like, well, but sometimes it's lying. I'm like, well, who cares? Just treat it like it's confabulation each time. You're giving them the grace and the out, right? Because when our kids, whether it's confabulating or true fibbing, they feel dumb, and they have to do this self-protection thing, right? So what we started to do, and one of the chapters in the book is all about the lying, the fibbing, the confabulation. But what we just started to do 5 years ago, and my daughter, the one who's diagnosed with an FASD, is 26. And so this was probably 5 or 6 years ago. We started to teach her the word confabulation, and we usually call it the big word because she can never remember the word. But we taught her, we say, because of your brain injury, because of your FASD, because of your brain differences, whatever language you use with your children when you're talking to them, you say your brain does this. All of our brains do this because everybody on here's brain confabulates, right?
Yeah.
But most of our brains just do it where we're just remembering something wrong, right? Like maybe we're saying to a significant other, "Oh, I told you I was going to do this," and they're like, "No, you didn't," and you say, "Yes, I did." "No, you didn't." You have one of those arguments. One of your brains is confabulating. Nobody's lying. The majority of the time, there's not actual fibbing going on in those moments. And so all of our brains do it, but people that have brain differences like FASD do it more often and bigger. And so they'll do those little things like that, but then they'll do those big, weird, wacky stories that are not realistic even. And so if we just teach them that your brain does this a bit more often than ours does, and and it's almost like your brain is trying to confuse you and make you think things are true that aren't. And you have to help us. You have to let us as your caregivers, as your parents, and we can train the school staff. And if there's other people in their life too, we'll let you know when your brain is doing that because otherwise people think you're fibbing and they don't want to be around you. And so when we kind of finally, again, she was probably 20 when we finally started shifting and doing it differently. Instead of, we used to always try to catch her in the lie. That's typical parenting. You catch them in the lie, you get them to admit they were lying, and then you punish them for it. That's what we usually do in parenting. That never worked for her. So when we stopped doing that and we started doing it, approaching it like this, it's really worked really well with her. She, most of the time, and she lives in a group home now in Minnesota here in the US, and I've trained her staff on this too. And most of the time, when we have to say something to her, like, oh, honey, I think your brain is starting to confabulate, remember the big word? She'll just be like, ah, and she just wants to change the subject. But there's been many times now where she stops herself in a confabulation and says, Mom, is my brain doing that big word? And I was like, holy cow, rock star, that's amazing. If, imagine if we could have been doing that her whole life, how many rages we would have avoided and how many hits to her self-esteem, right? Because every time that we are on their case over something that they have done that they shouldn't have do, that's another hit to their self-esteem. And so handling it just completely differently like that and not using the word fibbing or lying with them because then they're confused, right? They in the moment when they are confabulating, if we are sitting there and saying you're fibbing, they're like they don't even understand what fibbing is now because they think what they're saying is the honest to God's truth.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I think that becomes like really problematic, doesn't it, in families?
very.
So, what are the best strategies to reduce aggression, anger, mood swings, and child to parent violence? Big, massive topics, but
Oh yeah, yep, that's a full day training right there.
yeah.
The biggest thing, and I know when I did a webinar with you guys a couple of years ago, we talked somewhat about this, but we always need repetition, right? Our kids need a lot of repetition and so do we. So, our daughter, who is 26, has really a huge history of very significant raging behaviors, physical raging. And and when it was way too late in the game, I would say we realized that we were actually causing a lot of her rages, and that's never a good feeling, right? As a caregiver, that doesn't feel good to realize, oh wow, look at this. I was the one causing her to escalate. So when we finally figured that stuff out, we realized that the way we were handling it when she would start to get escalated, whether she was in the yellow zone or full on in the red zone, a lot of the things that we would say to her were not helpful and actually caused her to go higher into the red zone and stay there longer. So, I kind of have there's a whole chapter on raging in the book, but I kind of have this whole list of things that we shouldn't say or do to these kids, or even adults, to be honest. But when they are in the yellow or the red zone, right? We don't want to tell them to calm down or chill out because that's very condescending. I always share when I train the quote, never in the history of calming down has anyone calmed down by being told to calm down.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's so true, right? But it's one of the first things we start saying to these kids
Yeah,
when they
calm
get
down, calm down,
upset.
calm down. Yeah.
And it feels crappy. And then we repeat their names. I was doing a respite, it's a longer story that's in the book and stuff, but we were doing respite for an 18-year-old with FASD who had a huge history of raging. And he saw one of Akila's rages and how I handled it, and he told me I did it all wrong. And he was right, actually. He told me that he can't stand it when adults start repeating his name, right? And that's what I would do too. I'd be like, Akila, honey, Akila, calm down, honey, Akila. This is no big deal. You don't need to get so upset about this. Akila, I was just going to repeat mode because our secondary trauma for us families or staff, even who are working with these young people, kicks in big time. And our brain goes on fire and we often just go into repeat mode. And so, this is also the moments when we sit and we do things where we point out the consequences for the behavior,
Yeah.
right? We tell, what we have to understand is in these moments, these kids are down in their amygdala in the primitive brain where the fight, flight, freeze, fawn part of the brain is. It's not a place where they learn. You don't learn at all when you are down stuck in your amygdala. And so when you point out a consequence, even if you don't give consequences anymore, which is what I'm hoping, right? Using consequence punitive strategies don't work very effectively with this population. And so maybe you're just pointing out a natural consequence. Like kids aren't going to want to hang out with you if they see you, hitting your sibling or calling me names or whatever. That still is perceived as a threat when they're down in their amygdala. If they are cursing at you, threatening you, things like that, let it go in that moment. You don't even need to address it because they're not in a learning brain place. So you just ignore that. In a way, what I started doing is I almost kind of disassociate when she's raging. I go into la la land in my brain. I'm still present physically and I'm listening, but I just start going into a different place in my brain. And the things that she's saying, even if they are very personal and targeted, right? She might call me a blonde bitch, for example, right?
Yeah,
I I
yeah.
can't, I can't respond to that in the moment. I can't take don't take those things personally, even if it's about your weight and you are overweight. It's don't take it personally. We use the Q-tip philosophy. Quit taking it personally because it really isn't about you in those moments. So really, if we understand if we take a step back, think about the brain and the fact that they are down in that amygdala when everything is going awry or when they are anxious or stressed about anything, that's a really important thing to think about. A few months ago in a coaching program that I work in, we were I this one parent, this one caregiver, their 16-year-old son had his driver's license. I think he was 16 or 17, and the deal was he could drive to school as long as he didn't skip any classes. And she had seen in the portal that he had skipped 3 classes that day, and he did not come home after school. And it's like probably 10 p.m. in the evening while we're doing this coaching call, and it's her turn, and it's a group coaching model. She's mad, right? And as we're talking, the front door opens and he comes home and she's like, "What do I say?" And she's all mad. I'm like, first of all, deep breaths. Second of all, just go give him a hug and say, "I'm so glad you're home. I was worried about you. I hope you sleep well tonight." Because when he walks in that door, his brain is on fire. He has been avoiding coming home all day because he knows he broke the rule, right? That he skipped some classes. And so anything you say when he comes in that door after he's broken curfew or broke a rule, nothing you say in that moment matters. So wait till the next day when they're in a good brain place, and then we can talk about that. So we just really have to understand what's going on inside of their brains. And then we can think differently about how we're going to respond to them. When we started using these different strategies and stopped, the repetition that we were doing when she was escalating, and we just stopped talking, stop using logic. Logic doesn't work for these kids when their brains are online. And when we did that, the frequency and the intensity of her raging, it decreased significantly. And what's really cool is she has gone in the end of December. It will be 4 years. My daughter has gone with no physical raging. She still does a lot
Wow.
of verbal raging and plenty of property destruction. But if you've got a kid who has done that physical aggression towards people, that's a huge win. Huge win.
So, can I ask you this? How should you respond when the anger is aimed at one parent more than the other?
Oh, yes. And that's a really common. Most of the time, if we have a two-parent household, one of the parents is usually the more primary caregiver, right? There's one of the two that is more the one that's meeting the needs, that's doing the shopping, that's, doing the school meetings, doing the communication, and all of that kind of stuff. And generally, that is the caregiver that gets more of the targeted behavior. And so it's not always like that, but the majority of the time it is. And so that's a hard one because a lot of times then the other caregiver might make assumptions that the one caregiver isn't being strict enough, they're being too lenient, it's all their fault, and that's why the kid is having bigger behaviors with them. That's most of the time not what the case is. It is just because of the fact that that is the parent who meets more of their needs. So that means they have expectations of that one caregiver that are not realistic. And so first of all, we need to understand that and help both caregivers to understand the dynamic of why that happens. And then we want to, so again, it's about not taking it personally. If it is, and I was the one that was targeted in our family, I was the main primary caregiver. And eventually, I'll say my husband did initially on, he would say things like that it was, that he would say judgy things to me that, well, if you just do this, she won't do that, or things like that. Eventually, as she was getting older, though, he got more of her crappy behavior too, which I loved, of course. I was like, yeah, take that, sucker. But anyway, so eventually that will happen. But some of the things we have to do then within a partnership like that, whether it's a marriage or just a domestic partnership, is we have to figure out what can we do to support the one that gets the more targeted behavior, right? Whether it means that we are giving that other caregiver the break more often and understanding those dynamics, or maybe taking over some more of those primary care needs for the child so that it is more, if that's possible. That's not always possible because it might be that one parent has a more of a full-time job and one parent is maybe their full-time job is caring for the kids. So it's not always, but usually there are a lot of changes that we can make so that settles down a bit.
Fab. So let's talk about emotional regulation and de-escalation. And I think a lot of questions were about PDA type
Hmm.
behaviors as well. So, what are the most effective strategies for de-escalation during meltdowns?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is to try to catch it as early as you can, right? And because once they've tipped into that red zone, it's really just a matter of waiting it out once they're into the red zone. And so again, that's where we just stop talking too much. And sometimes the child or adolescent will be mad at you because you're not talking, right? And that's because that's what happened with our daughter. I'd be sitting there and I'm just intentionally not trying to respond to some of the things. And I've already answered her question several times at the beginning of this episode, right? And so when I was first trying to do that, she would get mad at me for not talking. And I would say, well, I'm trying to wait for you to be respectful or something. Ooh, that did not work. That sent her to the top of the red zone. And I realized that's basically me pointing the finger at her and blaming her, right? So instead, what I say in those moments to her, if she's mad because I'm not giving her what she needs or I'm not talking enough, in her opinion, is I say, you know what? I am super stressed and anxious right now, and I can't talk because I'm trying to keep myself regulated and calm. And that honestly, in those moments, the only thing you really can control is yourself. And so, especially once they've tipped into the red zone. Now, when they're in that yellow zone, that's when we are going to be more likely to be able to de-escalate them, right? By sometimes a distraction, getting kind of creative and unique and even silly sometimes with the distractions. Even at 26, for my daughter, the silly distractions still work really well for her. Now, they're not going to for every 26-year-old with FASD, but I've done things like when we used to get stuck in traffic and she would be starting to escalate because she doesn't like traffic. Nobody really likes traffic, right? We actually do like traffic now, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the times she was starting to verbally escalate, which meant we were this close to this getting physical, I rolled my window down and I started to yell at the top of my lungs, "Move out the way, people. Akila's in a hurry," only super loud, right? And she's like, "What the F are you doing, Mom?" And I was like, "What? You don't like traffic? I'm trying to get these people to move." And I rolled her window down. I'm like, "Do it with me." And we both just started yelling at the cars. And like it was in the summer in Minnesota and windows were open and people were looking at us and we are just waving and laughing. And now we actually kind of like traffic because we do that every time we're in traffic together. We start opening the windows even in the winter and just yelling and laughing hysterically. So traffic is now a bonding thing for us. So sometimes you just have to use these really kind of creative distractions. And I always recommend that you keep either an app on the phone or a journal where you document those times. What were they getting upset about? What was their, what distractions did you try? What time of the day was it? When had they last eaten or drank anything? And what would you do differently next time? And did the distraction work? And so, because you can recycle some of these distractions back in, right? Like, so you could every 3 months, maybe you can use this distraction again. You can't do the same one every time, or they kind of figure it out. So really, we want to try to distract them is one of the best things, but it's not going to work every time. There are going to be times you could have the most creative distraction in the world, and just because of the way that their brain is perseverating and hyper focused in that moment, it's not going to work. And so in many of those moments, it's just a matter of waiting it out. And so that's when I recommend you just stop talking a ton and listen and affirm. So here's the thing too, and we've all experienced this. If you have a kid who verbally and or physically rages, when they're doing that, a lot of the stuff that they're saying is kind of like, my daughter would be in one of her verbal rages that she's done a million times. She at 26 still doesn't have a cell phone. It's either she's going to be a victim of a crime or perpetrate a crime when she gets one, even the lockdown ones where you only talk and text. She's awesome, but she's kind of extreme in that area. And so when she gets into her verbal things, sometimes what she'll be upset about is the other, all of her siblings have cell phones, right? And she'll be raging and raging about that. Now, back in the day, I would have sat there and logically explained to her, I can't give you a cell phone because you did A, B, and C, or you're inappropriate, or you're not safe, right? Well, that doesn't help, and that just shames them and isn't helpful, right? So now what I do is I listen and I just, because it does stink to be 16 or 26 and not have a cell phone in today's world, right? Or whatever the thing is they're complaining about. One of her verbal rages, she was complaining about the fact that she lives in a group home and the other kids don't. That is a really legitimate thing to be upset about, right? But, and she can't understand the logic of why she needs to live there and why she needs that high level of support at this stage of her life. So I don't sit and explain that to her. I just listen to her. I affirm, I give her eye contact. I'm careful not to make it intimidating eye contact. But I don't just sit and say, yeah, I know. Oh, that is a bummer. Because if you say that, she'll say, well, you don't effing care. You don't do anything about it, did it, right? So it's just listening and really kind of understanding that what they're saying is a really legitimate thing often that they're complaining about, but they can't understand the logic of why they can't have what they're raging about. And so you just have to affirm, listen, empathize. If you have other kids in the family, I recommend code words. We used to have code words in our house. If we said it was either bagel or pineapple, the kids would change it all the time. If mom or dad said bagel or pineapple, that meant maybe go up to your bedroom for a while because it's going to get chaotic here. And eventually, we had a safety plan of three different neighbors' houses that they could go to in those moments.
But I think that's really interesting because I have a 15-year-old
Mhm.
with FASD, but she has this like real bizarre habit of like making a statement. It's not a question. She doesn't
Mhm.
have a question. She just makes a statement,
Mhm.
and then I don't answer, and she goes, "Are you listening?"
Mhm.
And I go, "Yeah, but it didn't require a response. It was
Yes.
just a
Yes.
statement." And we have
Yes.
this ongoing battle about her
Mhm.
statements that are not questions.
Yeah.
And I tend to not answer because I just think I'm going to escalate by answering. So I'm like really struggling with that because it's not
Uh-huh.
a question now. It's not really a huge issue to me, but clearly
Right.
her statement is a huge issue to her. But it is a
Yeah.
statement.
Yes, yes. Oh, and that's hard. And again, that's just their social skills that, don't understand that that's not something that required a response from,
Yeah.
right? Even though clearly they intended and needed one. And so, yeah, so sometimes with a kid like that, when they're saying that to you, you might want to say, okay, do you want me to say I hear you when you say a statement like that? Is that more helpful so that you know that I did hear it?
Yeah.
Or do you want me to say, I hear you? And do you want to phrase that into a question so I can help or something like that?
I did say to her, I said to her the other day when she was going, well, I say things and you don't answer. And I said, but you don't ask me a question, you just make a statement. And she went, yeah, but I don't know if you've heard.
Yeah.
So I said, so do you want me to say, I heard that?
Yes.
Well, that would be helpful, she said.
Yeah.
I
Duh,
was like,
mom.
okay, all right. So
I
now
love
when
our
you
kids.
say da 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 da, I'll go,
Yes.
okay, I heard that.
Yep. There you go.
It's funny. Okay,
Perfect.
so let's move on to executive functioning, learning, school, classroom, obviously huge areas for
Mhm.
all of our community.
Uh-huh.
So let's start at the top. So how do we support children who are academically able but struggle with executive functioning or behavior?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a complicated one because, one of the things that we have to, I sure wish our school systems could figure this out. but that our kids don't learn when their brains are on fire, right? And their executive functioning skills are not strengths when their brains are online, right? And then when their brains are offline, the executive functioning skills go completely on the wayside, and even the minimal ones that they do have. So like one of the biggest things is trying to work with our schools to help our children feel safe, and supported and understood and not judged. Because what most of them are so struggling with is just being in trouble constantly and always feeling like the teachers or the staff or the caregivers like that we're mad at them and judging them and blaming them and all of that kind of stuff. So really one of the biggest things for our kids to do better in their families is for us to focus on the connection and the relationship with them. And it's the same in the school system. I did actually 3 trainings last week for different schools. And in it, I talk about that, about the revenue that you get from building that relationship with this student. You have to, all of us, when we were in school, learned better from the teachers who we felt like we had a good relationship with, who we respected and felt respected by. And so that's one of the most important things. And a lot of times, unfortunately, a lot of our schools aren't kind of getting that. And they're saying shame-based things. That's another thing too that I feel like we need to talk to all of our school teams about. Please just be mindful of the language that you're using. We need to be mindful of this in our home settings too, because as caregivers, we're very shaming towards kids, right? Act your age. You're acting like a toddler. 16-year-olds don't do this. What were you thinking? If we say to a kid when they've done something they shouldn't have done, and we say, "Why did you do that?" or "What were you thinking?" immediately they feel dumb and their anxiety shoots through the roof immediately. So even just when, and why do we ask them that? There's no logical sense to why they just did whatever they did, right? Most of the time. And so we're trying to make logic of something that isn't logical. And so we just have to be mindful. And the schools do that a lot too. Like I have this one family I've been working with, and their kid has a hard time getting to school, has a lot of school avoidance. And then they go to school, and then the teacher says something shaming to them, like, "Well, if you were here, you would know this." Oh, great. Now they really want to come back tomorrow, like, and so we've got to really just work with the school systems on understanding the importance of building those relationships, because it will help these students to do better behaviorally and academically. And so, but some of the stuff we have to do with that, with the academics is, our students need a ton of repetition. A lot of the stuff.
Yeah, that was my next question. So,
Oh, okay.
um, does repetition,
Mhm.
for example, like learning times tables and telling the time, and
Yeah,
I have my own view as a
yeah,
parent,
yeah.
but do you think it actually helps?
A lot of those kind of things I say let go of, like multiplication tables. Like you can function in this world without knowing what 7 times 8 is. I hardly can remember that one ever, right? Like it's like you can function fine without having the multiplication tables memorized, or even telling time or some of that kind of stuff. So some of those kind of things, we can still focus on. I would say it took my daughter until ninth grade to be able to tell time on an analog clock, right? And I think they start teaching that in first, when they're
Well,
6 or
my daughter's in year 11, so she's 15,
yeah,
and she has only just in the last
yeah,
month, by having a one-to-one person
yes,
only on functional skills, she
mhm,
now can say, that's quarter
yep,
past, that's half past, that's
yes.
quarter to.
Yes, and that would be the same age as my daughter because we do grades different between
Yeah.
the US and there. But yeah, absolutely. But to sit for 9 years and keep hammering on something like that,
Yeah.
we don't want to. But we can work on
Well,
it a couple of times a year, right? Like,
yeah.
but most clocks, anyways, nowadays are digital anyway. So some of the skills we have to pick our battles, right? Does this make sense to hyper focus on memorizing the multiplication tables or certain things? It's a lot of the stuff that is, the memorizing things. If it's something that they really need to memorize, we want to use rhythm and rhyme and music or things like that with it usually. But most of those kind of things, repetition is good, not necessarily when it comes, it can help with memorizing, but just repetition with, because neurotypical kids learn things by watching. Most of us do, right? We'll just be like, you can pick up on social cues and social skills and different things like that. Our kids don't pick up on that stuff in the same way. And so it's about repetition. Like we used to do this thing with our daughter when she was younger, where we would just sit even with facial expressions, and I would go like this. What does that face tell you? What
Yeah.
emotion is this face, right? And I go, we would do these different faces, and because she was reading cues wrong all the time with people's facial expressions and their tone of their voice, and we would do it with that. We would practice tone of voice too, like, do I sound mad? Right? We would sit and play, and we would laugh and make it kind of fun. Now, I wasn't doing this daily with her, right? But there might have been some times where we were doing it maybe once a week or a couple of times a month or something like that. And again, we kind of made it a fun, almost like a game. So that's the repetition that we have to do. Most, neurotypical kids are going to pick that stuff up much quicker, but our kids are going to need some more repetition.
Yeah, and I think repetition is not bad, is it? Like,
No.
I know, like, I've struggled talking to school about the need for this. My daughter goes to a specialist school provision,
Hmm.
and they're great with autism and ADHD, but they're not so great with FASD. So I have this constant conversation about, no, you need to do it again. You need to do it again. You need to do it
Yes.
again. And I fought for a long time to get this one-to-one functional skills just for time
Yes.
and money, who's only been in place, I have to say, for 5 weeks,
Okay.
30 minutes a day outside of the classroom, one-to-one, time and money. And in that time, she's managed to learn quarter past, half past, quarter to. And
Yep.
she's 15. But she's done all of this education and not been able to do it because all she's had is
Yep.
timesheets with pictures of clocks and
Right.
somebody sitting next to her helping her do it. And like
Right.
what I found really interesting, and I was actually talking to the hub team about it, was that not only can she do it like on a clock, she's actually able to verbally say to me, the hour hand is the small hand. So if that is at 3 and it's quarter past, then the big hand has to be at 3 2. And for it to be half past, the big hand has got to move to 6. And for it to be
Mhm.
quarter to, it's got to move to 9. And I was just like, my goodness, she's 15 and we have waited this long for
Hmm.
this like epiphany of like
Yes.
to me is
Yes.
huge.
It is
But what
huge.
I find really upsetting is that it's taken all of this time for
Yeah.
school to really listen to
Yeah.
what I said she needed. And when
Yeah.
they
Hmm.
listened, which was September, they implemented it at the end of September. We're only in November, and
Hmm.
that small thing has
Yeah.
made this huge
Yeah.
change, which will be impactful to her life as an adult.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, let's move on again. So, how do we support children who are academically really able, but really struggle with behavior or executive functioning? Because I think we hear that a lot because,
Yes.
the
Yes.
spectrum is so huge. And,
Yes.
I have a child who's got an intellectual disability, but I speak to so many families where
Hmm.
they're like, they're really clever, they're really bright, they're
Yeah.
really this.
Hmm.
And in a school situation, I think that is probably more challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, to be honest, our higher are the ones that are more clever and brighter and have those higher IQs are the more challenging ones in general, usually. Sometimes the ones that match that intellectually disabled category can be a little bit easier in many aspects, especially because they usually qualify for supports better. But one of the things is it just might not be time yet to go as in depth into stuff. So like, I this is a hard one because if this kid really if this, adolescent child, whatever age they are, if they have the skills, the academic, the cognitive abilities to do something, but yet they don't have the executive functioning skills yet, and they don't have, the other things, the behavioral control that it takes to be successful at this stage. I think it's better to back off as much as we can of shoving the academics down their throat and back off a bit on that so that we can focus more on emotional safety and felt safety and things like that. Because until we have attained that, the learning isn't going to come easily for them, right? So some of the times, even for those, but also what we have to do is if we can try to find a school setting, and this is what gets really hard, we end up having to do a lot of shopping around for different school settings for our kids. You were saying that your daughter is in a specialty school. And so, we end a lot of times with kids like this, we end up having them in multiple different school settings. And, and because we're trying to find the place that's going to get them, that's going to stop judging them and stop all of that kind of stuff. So if we can find the right setting for them and the other thing I talk about too is within a school setting, there's always a champion or two or a handful of them in every school, right? And so I always say to caregivers, who is that champion at your kid's school? Who really gets them and is willing to listen and learn? And focus on that person or that handful of people and give them the nuggets of education and stuff like that. And eventually they'll probably start to spread it. I actually just with a family I was working with a couple of months ago, I said, who is that champion? I said, let's give that champion access to watch a recorded training and see. And now that this person watched it and they are talking their school district into having the whole school trained on it now. Right. So sometimes we have to find these little other ways of getting that training into the school, so
So
that they can.
another question I have is
Okay.
what support should schools provide, or how can you get schools to understand, I guess, when a child masks? Because so many of our
Yeah.
children masks and appear and mask and appear fine, and then they come home, and the
Mhm.
the impact of that is in the home.
Mhm.
And then when families try to speak to schools, they're like, "Well, it doesn't happen here. The child is fine." Da 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 da
Yes,
da.
yes,
So,
yes. I love
what
that.
what are the strategies and what should schools provide, or can they provide, or how
Yeah.
can we make them understand?
Yeah. Well, we want to, a lot of the schools have never heard of the delayed effect. That's what we call that whole dynamic of how these kids can do okay during the school day and then they get home and it's all bets are off and they're exploding all night. And that's called the delayed effect. They're able to hold it together while they're in this structured environment of the school setting, and especially because there's lots of eyes on them, right? And then they get home and they blow. And so we want to help the schools understand. There is a great video on YouTube that if you go and you search delayed effect and put autism behind it, you could even add Coke bottle, maybe. I don't know if you've seen that one, Joe. Sometimes in the coaching program, I would share that. But it's a Coke bottle going to school all day, and it's everything that happens all day long is a shake to the Coke bottle, but it holds it together. And when it gets home, the top of the Coke bottle explodes, right? And so we want to help the schools to understand that dynamic, that it's not because that's what we had the school sitting there telling us to do sticker charts when we were saying, I don't know what you're talking about. She's really hard at. And they were like, she's great. We don't have any problems. The other thing, though, that we can do, and I think in that webinar that I did with you guys a couple of years ago, I did the Fingaldobe and Pribben story. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
I think you did. Yeah, yeah.
Um, that's a story, that it just helps people to understand comprehension and how good our kids are at masking. The story is Fingaldobe and Pribben were in the nerdlink, treppering gloopy caples and gleaming burly greps, when suddenly a ditty strezzle boofed into Fingaldobe's trusk. Pribben glaped and glaped. Oh, Fingaldobe, he chiped, that ditty strezzle is tuning in your grep. So that's the story, right? And when I do that, when I do trainings with that, then I ask the questions to the audience. I'll say, what were the names of the characters? And they say Fingaldobe and Pribben. And I say, what happened to Fingaldobe's trusk? And they say, a ditty strezzle boofed into it. And I say, what did Pribben do? And they say, he glaped and glaped. And I'm like, when did the story take place? And they say, last Cerny. And I'm like, now what does the story mean? And they're like, I don't know. So that's just a way of helping schools to understand masking and how good our kids they become at knowing what they're supposed to say in any given moment. And you know where they do that the most though is therapy. Most of our kids have been over therapized and in therapy for so long that they know therapy speak as well as almost any therapist. And they can sit there and say that, you know, what they're supposed to say, but it doesn't mean they comprehend it and can put it into effect. And so,
That's quite funny
yeah.
actually, because I speak to a lot of families whose kids are in therapy,
Hmm.
um, and they would probably say the same thing.
Hmm.
And yet my daughter's never been in therapy, so
Yeah.
she doesn't
Yeah.
say any of it. She's just very like out there with like
Hmm.
the sort of normal talk, but
Hmm.
doesn't understand most of the normal talk. So
Exactly. Exactly.
it's good. Okay, brilliant. So let's talk about friendships and relationships and
Mhm.
vulnerabilities. How do we as parents support friendships and peer interactions and communication difficulties, especially given that as our children grow, particularly into teens, very often they crave this normality. They
Yeah.
might be able to go on social media, and that's a scary place for them to be. So they crave,
Hmm.
the life of a neurotypical
Yep.
young person. So
Yeah.
how do we support that?
You know, one of the hardest, you know, it is our kids really, they're really good at making friends. They're not good at keeping them. And so that's a hard one. Part of what's hard is that with neurotypical kids, usually as parents, we don't need to be all that heavily invested in helping them maintain those relationships and creating them and maintaining them, right? They just kind of do it. But our kids are going to need a lot more guidance and support, you know, through those relationships and those moments and stuff like that. So one of the things too that I often recommend too is getting connected with your local adoption foster care community and helping them to make friendships through that because you and I, Joe, could really well navigate our friendship between our girls, right? Like if
Yeah.
you and I were helping them navigate that and could sit on, and that's what I did back when we were raising our kids when we lived in Minnesota. I started bringing Akila to some different events and things like that that our adoption community and network like the Hub was having. And so then the parents would help them navigate those problems and challenges. And it's really nice when you have another parent that you can do it with, right? So, because you can always, you or I can always sit on one end and talk to our kid about something. But if we
Yeah.
don't know what is going on the other end with that other kid, it's a little bit more challenging. And eventually, too, I did a coaching session this morning with a 12-year-old little girl because I also do that where I'm meeting with sometimes with the teenager or the child who has FASD, and that we were talking about our brains, and I was like, yeah, I have FASD too. And we were talking about what our brains are both good at and what our brains are not great at, right? And she was talking about, you know, we were talking about friendships, and I was talking to her about confabulation and different stuff like that. And I said, how would you feel if your mom explained confabulation to your three good friends? And she actually was talking through a puppet. She had this new puppet, and she was like, the puppet was nodding its head, and I was like, so you know, we'll talk about that. So like Akila has a boyfriend she's been dating now for 8 years. I cannot tell you how much of my time and energy has gone into keeping that relationship because it's a huge protective factor for her. But especially in those first couple of years, and her boyfriend is very neurodivergent. I suspect he has FASD as well. And I had to sit and explain to him confabulation multiple different times so that because she would start doing, you know, some of those confabulations with him and he would be really confused. And so I would just sit with him separately, and she knew I was doing it, and explain that. And what we came up with a deal where whenever there's something that she says that doesn't sound right to him, he runs it by me first, you know. So a lot of times we just have to be more heavily involved. Now, again, a lot of them are going to be resistant to that and don't want us in their business and stuff like that. And so it's just a matter of helping them pick up the pieces then when they need us to.
Well, which leads really nicely onto this then. So, how do we support teens and young adults with FASD who are still living at home but want more independence then?
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt just before you answer,
go
just to
ahead.
say there's a couple of really good questions in the chat that maybe we could look at after this one, if that would be all right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely,
Thanks,
Gemma.
Gemma.
Let's just do this one and then we'll start
Yeah,
the
Brilliant.
question.
yeah. The hard thing with a lot of our, we keep talking about independent skills, independent living skills, and teaching our kids to be independent and all that kind of stuff. And, in the coaching programs and in my philosophy, what we believe is that we want to teach interdependence, right? None of us who are on this call tonight are truly independent. We all have people and items in our lives that help us be our best version of ourselves. But that is not concrete enough. Our kids do not see that. And so we want to even I recommend doing this at younger ages, but it's never too late to sit. And what I always talk about is who is this young person? Who do they idolize? Is it a musician? Is it, Ed Sheeran, one of your I love Ed Sheeran, your UK guy. Is it him? And that's probably not who the kids idolize, but who do they idolize? Maybe it's an athlete. I don't know. Maybe it's a football player, right? Over there. Who's a great football player?
Ronaldo.
Okay, Ronaldo. So, all they do is we see him out there on the field tearing it up and playing great. We don't understand that he's got an agent who does his contracts, who does his press releases. He's got an assistant too, probably, who schedules his things. He's got a nutritionist telling him what to eat. He's got a coach telling him what to do. He's got all these people in his life. He's got a financial advisor, right? All these things, but they don't see that. So we want to make that concrete. Let's spell it out. Talk to your kid. Who is it that they think is cool? Maybe it's one family I was working with last week. Their kid is into stocks. I was like, what? Okay, that's interesting. So maybe you take Bill Gates or some big financer or Jeff Bezos, I don't know. And like, let's look at who their team is, right? And write it out and be like, okay, here's their team. Here's my team as mom. Here's my team, right? Dad is part of my team, my therapist, my boss, my this, my coach, and spell it out, my doctor, my therapist. And then here's who's your team is, right? And all of our teams change. When I was your age, here's what my team looked like, right? So we want to help them, we want to normalize the fact that we all have teams, you just don't see it. And with their concrete brains, the more we can help them to see that,
That's
the better.
that's amazing, actually. Like just for me personally, and
Mhm.
I'll take 2 seconds to say it, but because my son's signed a pro football contract and he's got an
Oh.
agent who
Mhm.
is like a person he speaks to every week and he's accountable to him for everything. But
Yeah.
actually, I've never thought about making that comparable to my daughter, and
Yeah.
now I will. And
There
I'm
you
not going to go
go.
on about it because Gemma's got questions. So, Gemma, let's go back to your questions.
Okay, so we had a good one in the chat asking about catastrophizing. So they've given an example of if when it's time to pick up, say, Lego, it's
Yep.
time to put it away, the child will get upset and then
Hmm.
they'll say something like, we'll put it away and we'll never play with it again. And then we'll give the Lego away to other people and I'll never have it again. And I think all of us can relate to that in one, so they're taking it to that kind of millionth degree, and finding ways to respond to that in the moment and
Hmm.
how to support the child when they're kind of over catastrophizing like that.
Yeah, and that's really common, especially for kids with trauma histories in particular, which FASD is trauma in and of itself. But then a lot of our kids also experienced other traumas. And so that often is quite the fear that they have. But it's just it's a matter of in that moment, again, even, sometimes they're getting super dysregulated and upset because you're out of their favorite cookies or chips or whatever it is, right? And we're sitting here as the caregiver being like, are you kidding me? You're getting, like what? This is no big deal. It feels like a big deal to them right now. So we want to listen, we want to pay attention to whatever it is that they're saying. And that's where then you sit down and you're like, you know what? I'm going to help you pick up the Legos. Let's do this together. Now, if they're in a place where they can't even sit and do it with you, meet them where they're at. You know what? Okay, you know what? Mom's going to help. I'm going to sit here and do this right now. I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to pick up the Legos while we're doing this, right? Now, what we get concerned about is we feel like we're teaching them these bad patterns now, and that if they throw a tantrum, now they don't have to do that is neurotypical kids. with a neurotypical healthy brain kid, if we're doing things like that, they're going to learn this pattern now. For the most part, with our kids, that's not really how it plays out. And what I can tell you is, especially if you can make it a connected relational thing, it usually is not. So again, I know that we don't always have the time to sit down and pick up the Legos with them, but really, how long is it going to take to pick up the Legos? And why we want them to pick up the Legos is we're trying to teach them this life skill, right? And how to be a citizen in a family or a member of this family and contribute to it and all of that kind of stuff. But we also have to always think about what is their developmental age in the moment when they are in a refusal place. When they are refusing to do something and avoiding a task, they are almost always in a toddler brain. And so we need to meet them where they're at in that moment, even though the words coming out of their mouth might sound like a sailor, right? In that moment, they are probably closer to a toddler or a preschool brain. And so you want to meet them in a connected relational way, because otherwise all it does is escalate, 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 and it's not worth it. So just pick up the freaking Legos yourself.
I love that. Yes. I'm smiling in recognition. Yes.
Is there
Sounds
another
like a
one,
sailor,
Gemma?
but as a toddler.
Yeah. Yeah. And I haven't sworn yet. Aren't you impressed, Joe?
Yeah, I'm so
Very.
impressed.
The other one,
I
we've only
said
got
yet.
a few minutes left, but somebody's asked just for sort of general strategies around impulse control. If there was anything you could say on that about supporting our kids with their kind of their lack of impulse control.
Yeah, the biggest thing is that's a hard one. What we really want to try to do is to help them kind of get in tune with it, right? That impulse control, whether it's about taking things, and I didn't really answer that in your first question. You talked about confabulation and stealing together, and I didn't talk about the stealing or taking things. But we really started with our daughter with like taking things, for example. We started to teach her, when you feel that urge or impulse to take something that isn't yours, that you shouldn't take, tell the closest adult, right? Tell the closest adult. And like when she was in school, I had gone to the custodial staff, the lunchroom staff, the secretaries, the teachers, everybody in her school knew, if Akila comes to you and says, I just wanted to take whatever, my classmates' mittens or whatever it was, what they were supposed to say is, I'm so proud of you for telling me. Let's go to the office and find somebody to help you talk through this. And so, the more that we can help them, give them those little languages like that, little things like when you feel like taking something or when you feel like saying something. But most of the time, when it comes to the impulse control around yelling or name calling or cursing or threatening or even physical aggression, right? What we want to try to do is we want to get them in tune with their anxiety and what was going on before that, right? And so, like this young girl, this 12-year-old I was meeting with this morning, I was asking her, I said, because she yesterday had stole, $20 from her father and got busted on that. I said, when you first saw that $20 bill, what did it feel like inside your stomach? And she goes, it felt like this, like she was doing, like she was showing me his hands. And I was like, really? Did it feel like that in your head too? Like, what did it feel like in your brain? And like, getting them to get more in tune with what was happening and what were they feeling before that. So in the moment, you're never going to do anything, right? So like days later, we can say, hey, on Saturday, when this happened, what was going on in your stomach beforehand or in your head, or what were you feeling before? And some kids are going to have more insight in that and some don't. My daughter at 26, just in the last year, has started to develop some insight. Right? But many of the families I work with, their kids are much more insightful earlier. So all of our kids are different, right? The way it impacts their brain. And so trying to just get them understanding what they're feeling internally in those moments. And then we can try to give them some skills and strategies around when they're feeling like that, what they can do. One of my families, the kid when I asked this years ago to a different little girl, she said she felt like there was a tornado in her tummy, right? And then when we asked her about her head, she was like, "Well, it's kind of the same." And her dad was on this call, and he goes, "Is it like there's a hurricane in your head?" So we were going with the weather themes, you know. But we came up with them with a visual where if she put her hand on her head, and you can't see my stomach now, but a hand on her head and stomach, that was a visual cue to I am starting to feel anxious and stressed and icky, and everybody should stop talking and leave me alone right now, right? And so I got her to agree. I said, "Is it okay if mom and dad do the same thing? Because sometimes they're feeling anxious and stressed. So if you see mom and dad do that with their hands, can that be okay too? Can this just be a family?" And she was like, "Yeah." So that's what they started to, because a lot of times our kids can't verbalize what they're feeling in those moments because their brains are too garbled. So if we can give them a visual way of letting us know that they're feeling crappy in the moment, that can help.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Well,
Just
Barb, we've got lots of people saying they want you to move in to
move
Yeah.
into their house. Yeah.
There you go. Fly me over to the UK. I'll come for a week.
So I have I've got loads more questions, but there are a couple that I would like to ask. And the first one is, um, what do you think about the role of therapy models such as DDP, PACE, TheraPlay? Do they do they help teens or younger children with FASD?
Ooh, this is a hard one. I can get myself in a lot of trouble with this question.
I
I
know, that's why I'm asking you.
Thank you. I'm not a huge fan of therapy for the most part. It's so funny for neurotypical people, talk-based therapy can be really helpful. For people with neurodivergent brains, it doesn't work the same. And even a lot of the therapies, there's so many different modalities. You just mentioned several of them. And they still don't understand the FASD brain enough. Now, I sometimes even just talk therapy, there can be benefits to it, right? There's somebody else in their life that they can express their feelings to. That's not a bad thing ever, right? And so, but a lot of what I find as the most effective therapeutic intervention with FASD is occupational therapy with a sensory processing kind of focus to it. That's one of the bottom of the brain ones, right? If we look at Dr. Bruce Perry's neurosequential model, we talk about the bottom of the brain and up is where we want. So EMDR, never remember that acronym, eye motion desensitization. I don't know.
Yeah.
That thing, equine therapy, music therapy, nature assisted therapy, pet therapy, things like that are generally going to be more effective. But one of the challenges we as the caregivers have to really grasp is we've got to focus on stop trying to fix the child and meet them where they're at. And when I ask adults on the spectrum in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, or when I ask parents who have been on this parenting journey for 50 years or something, like I have a family that have a 50-some-year-old with FASD that I'm working with. I always will ask, what advice do you have for the parents who are in the trenches right now with those kids? And they're always like, the people who are diagnosed with it are like, I wish they just stopped trying to fix me and send me to every therapy and every doctor in the world. And because it does start to catastrophize things for them, right? They start to feel like such a problem and a burden. And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't do any of those things. You just have to really not hyper focus on it. Medications can help, but they're not going to fix everything as much too. It usually helps things, but it doesn't fix everything most of the time. And so the parents that are more experienced, they always say the same thing. I wish I had stopped hyper focusing on taking them to every therapy and intervention in the world and had just enjoyed them more and met them where they were
Well,
at.
I'm glad about that because I have no therapy for my daughter and
Mhm.
minimal medication, just
Yeah.
melatonin. And
Yeah.
she's got a very complex
Yes.
diagnosis.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I haven't done anything else.
Yeah.
So one of the final questions actually, because it came up a few times, and I'm really interested to know your thought on this. So thyroid issues and FASD. Is
Yes.
there any link?
Yes, there is. There is. I have
And can
thyroid
you
issues.
explain that to people?
But yes, I can. So there are 428 common co-occurring diagnoses with FASD, and I feel like I have 400 of them almost. I had my 18th surgery in September. I have had thyroid issues. I'm on thyroid meds. I've had thyroid surgery to have the nodule removed. And so it's really common that a lot of our kids, as they're getting older, will have issues with rheumatoid issues, endocrinology issues, thyroid. I have kidney stone issues right now and other kidney challenges that I'm dealing with again. And my daughter does as well. She has a really bizarre diagnosis called macrophagic myofasciitis. A lot of our kids will have early puberty onset, things like that. So alcohol is a teratogen, which means it crosses the placental barrier and can cause birth defects. And it can impact our bodies at every cellular level. And different parts of the body are being developed during those 9 months of pregnancy. And so we can definitely see some things like that are quite off with our kids. And so that's where trying to find some medical professionals with some minimal even knowledge of FASD can be helpful, or at least finding one who's willing to learn. And that's what we didn't find a lot of pediatricians in particular who knew enough about FASD, but I did find some that were willing to learn and did the research and kind of got into it and stuff like that. So that's important.
Okay, so before we finish, I think I just need to ask about success stories. So,
Uh-huh.
are there stories of
Yes.
thriving into adulthood? Now, clearly, that is your story, diagnosed in
Yeah.
your adult life,
Yeah.
already being successful, advocating, parenting. And I think that will give huge hope to
Hmm.
everybody here this evening. Like when I met you, you didn't have your diagnosis, and I was
Yep.
inspired and driven forward to do what I do today. So I think to close tonight, it would be really interesting to have your view on that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's such a ginormous spectrum in how it impacts people, right? I wasn't exposed to heavy levels of binge drinking like my daughter was. I was exposed to more social drinking. I am horrible at math. I have ADHD up the wazoo. I have a foul mouth like you don't even know. Like, well, Joe. But the people that have been in coaching with me know. But anyways, I struggle with the brain function of crossing the midline. I have sensory processing issues. Like I have plenty of challenge. I didn't graduate with my university degree. I went for 4 years right out of school. I went to university for 4 years, but there was a couple of classes that were snagging me up, right? And so when I was 38, 39, I went back and finally finished. So there's always hope with all of our kids. My daughter, who again was more severely impacted than I was, is thriving right now. She's 26, she has a boyfriend. Her behaviors has simmered down significantly. She has a job now for 2 or 3 months. She has a job where she's working 3 hours a day, and she is a huge success story. Now, I'll tell you what, the regular world would look at her and be like, really, that's a success? And I want to say, fuck y'all. But anyways, see, I had to get a swear word in before it was over. Anyways, I want to say, screw you. But the regular world doesn't understand how hard she had, where she's at right now is a PhD level, right? She's worked her
Yeah.
ass off to get this 3 hours doing maintenance at a store, and it's the equivalent of what people have done to get a PhD, in my opinion. And so there's a ton of success stories. There are a lot of our kids who are thriving and doing well. And one of the biggest successes, in my opinion, is if we have a good relationship with him. That is really if we have a 25-year-old, a 35-year-old who still has a good relationship with their family, and we're mostly talking about adoption and foster families here, right? If they still have a good relationship with you, they are a success, right? Even if they are in the justice system or having some challenges, if they still are coming to you and you still are supporting them and it's not, and it feels good, that is a success. So just because one of our kids is struggling with addiction issues or substance use stuff or things like that doesn't mean there isn't hope and that they can't do better, right? And what there is some new research that's coming out that just at the Canada FASD conference last month was coming out. I can't now, I'm zoning at Christine. If you're still on here, put that doctor's name. I can't think of her name right now. Is it Perkins? Who's doing research, and it was showing that adult in their around 35 is when we start to see a lot of our kids start to do much better in life. And if we use that cutting their age in half thing, when we're looking at their developmentally scattered profiles and we cut their age in half, when you're 30, you're 15. And that's with neurotypicals when we start backing off and seeing neurotypical adolescents be a little bit, safer and make better choices and stuff like that. So, oh, Dr. Temple, that's it. Thank you,
That's
Christine.
it, yeah. I
Um,
can't, I keep
mhm.
seeing comments. I can't like or respond to any comments in the chat for some reason. All I can do is delete them,
Yeah,
but I
I
can
can't
see
either.
them. So
Yep.
I saw Christine just put Dr.
Yes.
Temple.
Dr. Temple, Valerie Temple, exactly. Thank you, everybody. Um,
Um, so I
but
just want to
yeah,
say thank you so much. It's just
yeah.
been amazing
Yeah.
tonight. We could stay on for another hour. I also want to say that I've seen a comment. I think somebody doesn't want to buy your book from Amazon, so they want alternatives. So I think we can
Oh, you can go to
JKP, go to
jkp.com. Jessica
jkp.com.
Kingsley Publishers.
Yeah, Jessica Kingsley Publishers. Gemma can maybe post that. I think
Yeah.
maybe that person doesn't really like Amazon, thinks they're a
Oh,
bit
well,
easy.
I don't
Well,
blame him for that
we
at
all do.
all.
But we just want to sell the book and get that out there for
Yeah.
you.
Yep.
Um, it's been
Absolutely.
amazing. I think we
Yeah.
would love you to come back. I mean, an hour
Anytime.
is just not long enough at
Never
all.
enough, right? No,
It's
never enough.
never
And
enough. There
I'm
are
happy too. I know that Gemma put my website in the chat box. It's fasdmosaic.com. I do coaching with with caregivers, individual coaching, and with the kids, and can train virtually. Obviously, I think y'all should bring me over to the UK, though. I've never been there.
Yeah, I think you should come over as well. I think we need to like do a big drive for you to come over.
There you
Or
go. Let's do
or
it.
really, I think the hub team just want to come over there because I'm the
Oh,
only
well,
one that's
yeah.
like met you all you guys in person. So,
Yes. Well, you can all come over here too anytime.
and that was amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much.
There is an FASD caregiver conference May 14th and 15th in Minnesota that proofalliance.org puts on, and that's open to anybody from anywhere in the world. And
May.
May 14th and 15th. And
Oh, okay. I'm
I
coming
will be
then.
at it.
That's after Wembley. So I'm just coming anyway.
Oh, there you go. Let's do it.
I'll be there.
Good. That'll be fun.
Is it on sale now?
They haven't opened the registration yet, and oddly enough, it's free. I mean, obviously you'd have to pay for travel, but I don't think there's a registration fee for this. There hasn't been in the past.
Oh, well, I'm definitely coming. I'll be coming and I'll be filming like things for us to have on our thing when I
Oh,
come back.
there you go. Awesome.
Thank you everybody who's attended this evening. It's been amazing. I'm sorry we've run over, but I know we could absolutely stay on for longer, but I have to be mindful of our team and it's now quarter
Yeah.
past nine and
Bedtime.
Gemma and I are working in the morning. And Barb, thank you so much for giving
Yeah.
your time to us so freely and so generously. It's been amazing. But definitely we need another one. We're nowhere near through all our questions.
Yep. Yep.
But thank you for joining us. Good night from us and good afternoon to you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. Take care, and we will see you all at our next webinar.